how to plan a road trip in South Africa. I've done so many road trips over the years that I think I'm somewhat of a pro. Obviously my first road trip was a learning curve, and every road trip thereafter I've learned a lot of things and ways to improve it. So if you are a little scared about doing your first road trip in South Africa, let me tell you all the things I've done so far, what the things that you need to think about, things to remember, and it'll be an awesome experience. Obviously I have my map of South Africa. I love just a normal map. I know a lot of people use technology, and that's also okay. When you start planning a road trip or want to plan a road trip, the very first thing you need to do is choose a place that you want to go to or a town that you want to experience. And the reason for this is that this will be thing that you will work around. Our first road trip, we wanted to go to the Addo Elephant National Park in the Eastern Cape, and so that is what we will use as the pinpoint for our road trip. Normally you would put it in, Google Maps, and you will see how far it is from the place you reside from. So we reside in Cape Town, so I put in, okay, from Cape Town to Addo Elephant National Park, how long is it gonna take? Now there are different drivers, and that's okay. So like with Courtney, I would ask him, hey, how long are you willing to drive? Courtney's my husband. Are you willing to drive from Cape Town to X amount of town, right? He would say no, his maximum for the day is 5 hours. So I would then look at what the time is from Cape Town, 5 hours, and decide which town is more or less in the 5 hour range. And then I would start drafting what that route looks like. So for us, Courtney's the only driver, I have to go around his schedule. So if he says 5 hours and I say, okay, from Cape Town to Knysna is more or less 5 hours, and I'm saying more or less, I would put that on my little paper and I'll start planning out the entire trip, going from Cape Town to Addo and then from Addo back, and deciding how that route would look like. Do I want to take a main road? Do I want to go on the unbeaten path? And you kind of draw somewhat of a draft of an itinerary. Once you have that in place, I will then open all my accommodation sites. So the ones I typically use is AfriStay, Travel Ground, Liquor Slab, and Airbnb. I know some people use bookings.com. I don't like bookings.com. It's a personal preference. And a lot of times you can also just search in Google accommodations in X town. I normally have it all open. I can decide, okay, what is my X amount of money am I willing to spend per night? So for us, if it's just a pit stop, we normally spend between 700 and 800 rand per night. But if we're staying there for 2 or more nights, I'm willing to go to 1,000 rand, maybe a little bit more. Again, it all depends on what your budget looks like for this road trip, how many days you're gonna spend, do you plan on doing activities. There's a lot of things to think about when you're doing this road trip. Sometimes it can be spur of the moment, but a lot of times a lot of us do want to plan just from a monetary or budget situation. I would type in all of these accommodation places, look at what fits in my range. If it's a pit stop, if I'm just pit stopping in Knysna, I would then look between 700 and 800 rand. There are filters that are in these accommodation sites, and so you will start jotting down kind of like, okay, I like this place or that place. A lot of these accommodation sites does allow you to favorite or like do a little heart or add it to your wish list. I know Airbnb has a wish list. I know Travel Ground, you can click on the heart and make it a favorite, and so you can kind of just stack up all of your accommodations within the accommodation site. If you are starting to jot down, okay, maybe in Plettenberg Bay there aren't really accommodations that suit your preference, or there isn't accommodations in general. That does happen. That happened with us when we were plotting our Mpumalanga road trip, and I had to move to the next town and then find it that way. Normally your draft will look like this. So this is normally what my draft looks like, and then it changes from time as you're starting to plot your entire road trip. You start also saying, wow, how much hours it is. So from Cape Town to Knysna, you would say it's 4 hours. Normally I add an additional 2 hours to that 4-hour route, because you just think about stops. Normally when Courtney and I do road trips, I make sure that he stops every 2.5-3 hours, just so that we can stretch our legs, get a bite to eat, something like that. So I would add 2 hours to the trip. That's just how we roll. Sometimes Courtney will be like, I'm just gonna drive the 5 hours, but that's a very rare and far in between. So it will end up a little bit crazy. As time goes on, you will then have a complete list, which my complete list looked like this. And this list was to tell me how much my accommodations were going to cost all in all for this road trip. So that was a great way for me to determine, okay, I'm going to spend X amount of money for this trip in terms of accommodation. Once you have all the towns that you want to visit and stop at, you're gonna start planning your activity list. So what I mean by activities is that if you are planning on staying in, you know, Storms River for 2 nights, you normally would want to do activities. You would want to go to the Titicaca Nature Reserve, you want to go on the Suspension Bridge. So then you can go and search how much the entrance fee is for that, what you would require. You would require like your ID if you're a South African citizen, because the prices in national parks differ when you're a South African citizen or you're an international citizen. So those are things that you would start making lists of, and how much those activities are going to cost. Then it will tell you, okay, you've now got your breakdown for your accommodations, you now got your breakdown for your activities. Now it's to move on to fuel. Fuel is a tricky one, because if you live in the coastal areas, our fuel is a rand less than one's inland. So often Courtney and I forget that when we go inland, for example like the Free State or Mpumalanga, the Northern Cape, we forget that it's a rand more, and so your fuel will be a little different or higher in cost. You can determine that. I think I'll put a calculation of how you can determine it based on the kilometers. You can kind of Google it on Google Maps, saying from Cape Town to Loxton in the Northern Cape, this is how much kilometers it is, this is what the petrol is currently at, and you can determine it that way. I don't know it on the top of my head, but I'll put the calculations here, and you can start determining what the fuel price is. It's going to differ, maybe a little bit, maybe not, but you can kind of calculate what petrol is going to cost on this trip. So now you have your accommodations, you have activities, and now you have your fuel prices in place. One thing that has been the pain of my existence is the food budget, because a lot of times Gordon and I are people that love doing self-catering accommodations, so that we can say, okay, if we're gonna be staying for 2 nights, we are not gonna be spending the 3 days 2 nights eating out, but we will say, okay, when we get there we are going to eat out, and then for breakfast and lunch we might just buy stuff at the local spa or the OK mini market, and then make something at home, and then for supper we'll eat out. So we kind of determine it that way. However, something that Courtney and I have been doing is that when we get to a certain point in our road trip where we are so exhausted, we then eat out a lot and don't want to cook. So that for us is a downfall, but for most cases we do plan out when we're gonna eat, when we're gonna not eat. Obviously you can't determine what the food prices is gonna be like in each town, in each restaurant. There are menus on some websites. A lot of small town restaurants don't have websites and them showing you what the menu prices are, but it will fluctuate. Your food budget is one of the biggest budgets, I feel like, when it comes to in a road trip, because often when you stop, you want cool drink, you want biltong, you want all of these things. One thing that I've done now recently on a few of my road trips is actually buy a lot of my luxuries before going on the road trip. So buying all of the sweets and chips and cool drinks, and then it actually saves us a lot, because I think my first road trip we kept all the slips and wanted to determine what was the biggest category, and food happened to be the biggest category, but the biggest one was the stops, consistently stopping, you know, fueling up and then going into the shop buying chips and sweets. That happened to be the biggest one of all. So what I've done now in preparation is just buying everything in bulk and then taking it along with us on the road trip, and that saved us a lot of money on the trip. So there's a lot of ways that you can save money on food, but food ends up being the biggest part of our budget when it comes to a road trip. Some things that I want you guys to take note of when you are planning a road trip is, number one, the car that you're driving with. If you're taking your own car or your own vehicle, make sure that it's roadworthy. Unfortunately, a lot of parts of South Africa, the roads aren't great, so you'll find that there's a lot of potholes. I know when we went to the Free State, there wasn't even a road to begin with, and so just making sure that your vehicle is in good condition. So when we went to Mpumalanga, and I'm talking about Mpumalanga because it was a recent road trip we went to, or we went on, we bought all 4 new tires, and we had a mini service done, and we made sure that our car was in tip-top shape for us to do the big trip to Mpumalanga from Cape Town. Number 2, have cash on you. A lot of small towns do not operate with card facilities. I can't remember how many times Scott and I would have to turn around because I would say cash only, and normally in the big cities that we live in, such as Cape Town, we don't carry cash. Everything is cards for us on SnapScan or Zapper. So just remember to draw some cash with you. Also, another thing to take note of is there are toll gates on the main highways, and Mpumalanga had the most toll gates. They were also really expensive. So toll gates are also something to research if you're doing a road trip. Is there toll gates on your route and how much it would normally cost? So when we went to Mpumalanga, the main toll gate was 120 rand. I nearly cried, but they only take cash and credit card. So check and debit card they do not take. Remember to have cash either for the toll gate or a credit card if you have a credit card to pay for the toll gate. A few other things to remember when you are doing a road trip in South Africa is that a lot of small towns, like very small towns or villages, if you want to put it that way, do not have fueling stations, or they have 1 or 2 pumps and they operate in the weirdest times. We went to Loxton, they had a fueling station, but the fueling station would be open between 6 and 10 in the morning, and so you would then have to go to the nearest big town to fuel up. So if your tank is perhaps halfway and you are coming across a fueling station, rather just fill up and be done with it and not be stranded in a small town where there's no petrol station or it operates in a very weird operating time. If you live on coastal provinces such as, you know, the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, just remember that the petrol inland is a rand more, so take that into consideration when you're doing your road trip. And then also, like I mentioned, the toll gate. Unexpectedly, we had such a lot of toll gates in Mpumalanga. It was really expensive. Like I said, the main toll gate was 120 rand. The toll gate that we took to go to the Kruger was 90 rand, and that was in and out, and the same with the main one, in and out. So it really took a toll on our cash flow. That's just a few things of how Courtney and I plan our road trip. We've gotten great at it, and I hope that this helps you plan your first road trip anywhere in South Africa. Please let me know if you're planning one, if you've planned one already, and you have tips to share with me and the others. Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I really hope it helped you plan your first road trip anywhere in South Africa.